Hey Ribsy readers, let's get started with Chapter 7. I also wanted to let you know that Chapter 7 is the final chapter in this text. So after we have finished this one, we're going to start a new read aloud with another Beverly Cleary story. Chapter 7 is a little bit long, so I'll tell you right up front, you are going to be left off at a cliffhanger, but I'll post more from the rest of the chapter and the end of the story tomorrow. I promise. Chapter 7, Ribsy and the Apartment House. Henry pressed the telephone against his ear as hard as he could. He heard a lot of barking, and then he heard Joe yell, "What'd you let him go for? There's a reward for him. It was $10 whole." There was an answer in a girl's voice, which Henry couldn't catch. The sound of thumping feet, and then nothing but the sound of a television set turned to a program with a lot of noise happening. "I don't get it," said Henry to his mother and father, who had been following his side of the conversation. "There was a lot of barking, and now there isn't anyone on the line. Hello? Anyone home?" he asked into the telephone in a loud voice. There was no answer, only the show on the television. "Hang on a minute and see what happens," said Mr. Huggins. "Now that we're this close to Ribsy, we can't let him get away. Let's think for a minute how you'd be feeling if you were Henry. Obviously, as soon as you heard Ribsy's voice, you would absolutely feel elated. Beyond elated. You'd heard your dog's voice for the first time in so many weeks now. You knew that he was there, you knew that he was somewhere, and you knew that he was safe. And now, all of a sudden, all of your communication with Ribsy is gone, and all you hear on the other side is chaos and confusion. He must be feeling really frustrated right now." "Hang on a minute and see what happens," said Mr. Huggins. "Now that we're this close to Ribsy, we can't let him get away." Henry strained to catch any sound that might come through the telephone. He heard barks that grew fainter, yelling, arguing, and finally a click as someone in the Saylor household put the telephone back on the receiver. That click was as final as a period at the end of a sentence. Slowly, he replaced his phone's receiver. He thought a moment and then said, "At least Ribsy recognized me. That's certainly something." When Ribsy could run no more, he flopped down on the sidewalk into the dark to pant. As soon as he had caught his breath, he got up again and started off at a brisk trot with his nose to the ground. The trouble was that he did not know where he was going. It was all very puzzling. He had heard Henry Huggins's voice, but he couldn't find Henry. He stopped and barked, thinking that Henry would talk back. When there was no answer, he continued his search, hoping his nose could guide him. The sidewalk gave Ribsy the scent of many people and of a variety of dogs and a cat or two, but it didn't give him the scent of Henry. Ribsy became tired, confused, and bewildered. Late that night, he gave up looking for Henry and went to sleep on the cold concrete in front of the Cup of Coffee Cafe, where the lingering smell of hamburgers fried during the day gave him a little bit of comfort. Let's talk about what Beverly Cleary has done here. She left us off with a really, really exciting point. Henry and Ribsy had finally heard each other's voices for the first time in so long. Ribsy darts off away from the sailor's house as fast as he can in search of his Henry, but he can't find him. Listen to the details she uses in her writing. She says that he has to sleep on cold concrete. So the words that she's choosing right now are actually words that make this bad situation even worse. Early the next morning, Ribsy woke up, feeling stiff and hungry. The Coffee Cup Cafe was not open, so he walked around to the back door where he found a garbage can that smelled quite interesting. It must have smelled interesting to some other dog, too, because the can had been tipped over and the garbage was strewn about around the ground. Ribsy helped himself to some bits of a bun, which were smeared with more relish than he cared for. He also ate the remains of a piece of pie. The best garbage had already been eaten, but at least his stomach was no longer completely empty. Ribsy wandered aimlessly around the neighborhood, which did not look at all like his neighborhood, with green lawns and white homes surrounded by shrubbery. There was very little grass in this neighborhood, and not many bushes, although there were quite a number of fire hydrants. Many of the buildings came right to the sidewalk, and most of them were made of brick and were at least 3 or 4 stories high. So if we think about what we're visualizing now and we think about the perspective of a reader, for you as readers coming from what would be considered mostly a rural place where homes are spread far apart and there aren't as many homes or as people as there are in where I'm from, an urban place, a city, where you're often seeing lots and lots of houses closer together. The neighborhood that I live in looks a lot like your neighborhood, where I don't have high rises and things like that. But if you were to travel from my neighborhood, probably about, I'd say, 6 or 7 minutes away, further into the city of Worcester, you would see exactly what Beverly Cleary is describing here. So sometimes our perspective as a reader helps us to visualize something a little easier. If we don't have any context for that situation, for example, you might not have been to a city before, so you might not know what a city looks like, you could use the details that the writer, Beverly Cleary, provides. She really does a great job with helping the reader to visualize. It was in front of one of these buildings that Ribsy first saw the boy with the tennis ball. He was a thin boy, somewhat round-shouldered, who was sitting on the front steps tossing the ball from one hand to the other. Naturally, Ribsy was interested in a boy with a tennis ball. While Ribsy was watching the boy, a young woman came out of the apartment house. She was wearing a black coat over the starched dress and apron of a waitress. "Now see here, Larry," she said. "You keep out of trouble today. Hear me?" "Yes, Mom." Larry stopped tossing the ball. Ribsy decided he did not like the smell of this woman. It reminded him of that violet bubble bath. "I don't want to hear any more complaints from the manager about you," continued his mother. "Last Saturday, Mrs. Creech complained that you played a mouth organ in the hall, bounced a ball so it disturbed the lady downstairs, and tried to climb down the fire escape. Keep it up and you'll get us evicted. Then where will we go?" Larry heaved a big sigh to show that he was disgusted with the whole situation. "But, Mom, there's nothing to do. I don't even have a good ball to take to the playground." "Well, I don't have money to buy those," said his mother. "At noon, you can come to the cafe and get your lunch. And in the meantime, stay out of trouble." She left the apartment house and hurried down the street toward the cafe. Larry began to bounce the tennis ball, which was old and had lost much of its life. He had to throw it down hard to make it bounce at all. Nevertheless, the sight was a stimulating one to Ribsy. He pranced right up to Larry and wagged his tail to show that he was ready to play too. Larry didn't understand. "Go away, old dog," he said crossly, and muttered, "I don't even have a good ball." This boy needed educating. Ribsy barked to tell him that here was a dog who was ready to play with a tennis ball. Larry backed away. Ribsy wagged his tail and looked eager, but this only made Larry cautious. Plainly, Ribsy would have to show this boy how to play the game. He bowed before Larry, ran off a little way, and then came dashing back. Larry dropped the ball, and Ribsy picked it up. "Give me back my ball," said Larry. Ribsy dropped the ball and stood over it, wagging his tail. Cautiously, Larry advanced toward the ball. But when he was just about to pick it up, Ribsy grabbed it and went racing up the street. "Hey!" yelled Larry. Ribsy raced back, dropped the ball at Larry's feet, and stood waving his tail and looking hopefully up at the boy. "Well, thanks, pal," Larry said, surprised and pleased. "Woof!" answered Ribsy. The boy finally understood. He threw the ball down the street, and Ribsy bounded after it, darting between the people who were walking along the sidewalk and catching it on the first bounce. He was delighted, and so was Larry. The boy threw the ball again and again and again for Ribsy to retrieve. Finally, Larry sat down on the front steps of the apartment house, and Ribsy threw himself down at his feet to pant. Here's an illustration that goes along with what we're reading. "You're a pretty nice dog," remarked Larry. "I'd sure like to keep you, but old Lady Creech would never let me." Ribsy laid his nose on his paws and looked up at Larry, who returned Ribsy's gaze. "You hungry?" Larry asked. Ribsy thumped his tail on the sidewalk. He liked having a boy talk to him. Larry liked having a dog to talk to. "If you was a big cross dog, I bet old Lady Creech would stop yelling at me. She'd be scared to yell if I had a big dog following me around." Ribsy rolled over on his back and allowed Larry to rub his stomach for him. "Now, wait here," said Larry. "No, that won't work. You might run off while I'm getting you something to eat. Can you be really quiet?" Again, Ribsy thumped his tail. "Come on then. I'll get you some cornflakes or a hot dog or something," said Larry, and pulled a key out of his pocket. Ribsy followed him up the stairs, and Larry unlocked the front door. Inside, he tiptoed past the door of the apartment occupied by the manager of the building to an old-fashioned elevator. Ribsy was ready to enjoy this new game that the boy was playing. Larry opened a glass door and folded back a metal gate, and Ribsy followed him into what appeared to be a small square room without any windows. Larry closed the gate and the door and pushed a button on the wall. There was a strange noise, and suddenly, Ribsy felt a feeling he had never felt before. He felt as if he was going up while his stomach stayed down. He did not like this feeling one bit. He did not like this strange little room. He wanted out right now, so he began to bark. Shh! Larry seemed very upset about something because he scowled and grabbed at Ribsy. Shh! Shh! She'll hear you! The manager had already heard. We're going to pause right here, and I want you to think about what might happen next. Why, right after the detail about Ribsy barking, why did Beverly Cleary say, the manager had already heard? Think about what might happen next. Also, not only think about Ribsy's perspective, but think about Henry's perspective. What might he possibly do next? See you soon.